Hello and welcome to Talking into the Future. I'm Mary Lou Aleskie, the Howard Gilman Director of the Hopkins Center for the Arts, and we're here for a conversation between SITI Company and Urban Bushwoman, two landmark companies reflecting on their work and legacy as they encounter their third decade of artistic creation, teaching, and influencing communities. This is the first of a series of conversations SITI is planning as part of their Living Archive and legacy plan that you'll hear more about in this session. The Hopkins Center at Dartmouth has for a very long time been a center for scholarship and experiences and has been a place where arts and ideas merge to create new knowledge informing the future. We are grateful to be able to work with both of these organizations at such a pivotal time in their histories and our country and world's history. And while we look forward to our return to the live stage, we can also look forward to welcoming SITI and Urban Bushwomen back to Dartmouth as soon as it is feasible. In the meantime, we rely on our digital stage, Hop at Home, to continue to build our relationships with them and with you, and to serve our broader community and with their work and values and ideas. Our discussion tonight reflects on the respective life cycles of these companies, what distinguishes them in their artistic work, but also their process, the process and qualities of leadership that comes from commitment to collaboration. And while different in their work, each of these companies value ensemble as an artistic process as well as an organizational structure. Better understanding the value of horizontal rather than hierarchical being is especially timely and necessary now as we grapple to address the challenges we all face in creating a more just and sustainable world, especially for BIPOC artists and those whose voices are unheard. Tonight with me, I welcome Anne Bogart, who founded SITI with Japanese director Tadashi Suzuki in 1992. And I have to say I was privileged to be there in the first year when that was happening. Ellen Lauren, a founding member of the company, is also co-artistic director of the SITI Company. And they're joined by Jawole, Willa Zollar, who founded Urban Bushwomen as a performance ensemble dedicated to exploring the use of cultural expression as a catalyst for social change. That happened in 1984. And then Chanon Judson joined this critically acclaimed company in 2001 and now shares co-artistic directorship with Samantha Spies. To get us started, and let us see a little bit of what these companies look like and what their work looks like. We have a really dynamic video. And Mark, so let's roll the video, please.
Coltrane is an icon. His work is masterful, and he changed the way that people thought about this form we call jazz. It's music that moved me very early in my choreographic dancing life when I was just thinking about being a choreographer. So I became interested not only in Coltrane's music, but the journey of his life. Right now, Walking with Train is conceived in three parts, looking at three different kind of manifestations of Coltrane's life. One section is taking the last section of a Love Supreme psalm and working with the process I call physical transcription and working to get the exact phrasing, but it would be in silence. Another section, I'm really looking at how people talked about experiencing his music in the club, that it was muscular, that it was athletic. People had this experience of something intense and powerful and deep. So I just have questions about how do we find that? What is a world that we can create that doesn't try to replicate that, but takes a riff off of that? My original idea for making a new approach to a Love Supreme was to do new music and original music inspired by, but I thought I didn't want to use a saxophone because I thought the reference was too obvious. So I thought, well, what if a pianist took an approach that took each of those sections and the ideas of those sections, but really took a very unique and purposeful musical approach.
Well, George called me up and I said, well, you know, they do know that John played the saxophone, right? So we had a nice little laugh about that. Then I said, okay, well, fine. You know, I was really excited about trying to bring that genius of John Coltrane music to the piano. You know?
I think there's something different that happens when you're working with live music as opposed to recorded music. There's an immediacy, there's a response. You know, you have to be deeply attuned to listening, and particularly when you're working with an improvisational form, the creative music that we commonly call jazz. This idea of co-creating on the stage together is a very exciting concept. One of the questions I was interested in is how do we have a deep relationship with the music of Coltrane and the life of Coltrane as a jumping off point to new information and new material. And that's been a lot of process and research for us.
Initially, I thought that I would be simply creating movement. Jawole brought me in for a workshop with her students in falling. And so we explored, you know, concepts and ideas around falling, and then we went and took that back into company rehearsals and into an intensive 2-week creative process together with the company. And as that occurred, I found myself being more involved in this conceptual idea of what the work would be.
So there's been a really wonderful research process of not necessarily focused on making the work yet, but really what are we learning about an approach to making the work. I think when presenters are looking at how to talk about this work, like anything with Urban Bushwoman, it's many, many layers and levels. So there is a relationship to the music. There is a relationship to the life of Coltrane. There's a relationship to Urban Bushwoman's continuing exploration and continuing growth and evolution and role in nurturing the voices of choreographers, and particularly African-American women choreographers. So I think all of those things are part of what's happening in Walking the
And now I'm saying something introductory to get something settled or someone adjusted. There's going on and getting started. On with this show!
And what with this piece, with the circles and everything, they just didn't get it.
It was a splendid mind.
It was a splendid mind.
Standing by, standing by.
Page 33.
The alphabet is ranged in 26 letters.
He reached Q.
He reached Q.
Then R.
His wife and son together in the window.
That flash of darkness.
That flash of darkness.
He stopped to light his pipe.
Between which the blue waters of the bay looked bluer than ever. But this was suddenly interrupted, William Banks remembered. Ramsay, stopping, pointed to his stick and said, "Pretty, pretty," an odd illumination into his heart. Banks had thought it, which showed his simplicity, his sympathy with humble things.
これ何?
It's nothing.
雪なのね。きっと雪なのね。汚れた雪。
Who can impress the forest? Bid the tree unfix his earthbound root. Sweet motives good.
This hammer's gonna be a death on me.
believe in.
We are going to the Bijou for the double feature.
A flood tide of filth is engulfing our country and threatening to pervert our American children.
When's the last time you had sex?
If only theater could be like that!
So fabulous, and such a treat to see this work back to back. As I'm watching it, I'm thinking how much Urban Bushwoman feels like theater and how much City feels like dance. It's just fantastic. So let's just jump right into the conversation here. You mentioned co-creating in your comments, Jawole. And it's really the common theme here is the commitment to the collective. So where does it start? Does it start with a common artistic practice, an agreed upon way forward in that? Or is it a more of a common set of values that you're following? Where does it start?
I think what's interesting to me is I think that it's really both of those things that when I first started the company, it was really inspired by theater ensembles and inspired by jazz ensembles. So this idea of where it starts was, from the individual, from the band leader, from an idea that we would come together. And in the beginning years, we were developing an artistic practice that we hadn't articulated, or we didn't really have the articulation for. But we knew that it was about ensemble. It was about the individual playing as the soloist inside of the ensemble, and that you are a part of. You were in community with the ensemble, and that creation was really important, delicate at times, and powerful. So I think over the years now we've developed an artistic practice that's dense, multi-layered. It's physical practice. It's our strength training. It's our vocal work. It's our vocal production for singing, vocal production for speaking. It's all of these different practices that inform the lens of being an ensemble of visual storytellers, of physical storytellers. And at the same time, and this is important in dance which in the past, and still somewhat now, has been so much geared towards the ensemble should all look alike. And that's something we were pushing, that no, in fact, we don't want it. We want to be like a band sound, that when you hear Coltrane, you can hear the difference between Coltrane and Sonny Rollins. You can hear the difference between Miles Davis and Freddie Hubbard. You could hear the distinction of the individual. You should see that in their dancing practice as well.
And you do, and I just love that segment about did they know that Coltrane was yes. So fantastic.
They thought I was pretty crazy actually when I said I wanted to do solo piano for Coltrane. They were like, solo piano? It's going to take on Coltrane? I was like, yeah. It's the language. It'll allow us to create a new language.
Yeah. So what about City, Anne? I mean, where does it start for City in terms of the collective?
Exactly as Jawole said, it starts with the ensemble, and it is a collaborative process. And it's so collaborative. I'm looking at you, Mary Lou, and as she mentioned, Mary Lou was part of the forming of SITI Company. She was really the muscle behind it, and you were a part of the collaborative spirit and always have been. So I just want to say it's such a delight to be here with you and to be with your colleagues and your audiences. And I hope it's something that we will continue. And also with Urban Bushwomen, even just getting together makes me want to be in the room with them and have SITI Company and Urban Bushwomen together. I mean, what would happen? And that's really the question, which is what would happen when you get these people together? As Jawole said, people should be different. They shouldn't be the same. SITI Company is a group of really disagreeing people. We disagree all the time, and yet we've stuck together for nearly 30 years, mainly because we disagree in a way that is the unity is our love for the art form. But at a certain point, and it's why I want to get together with Urban Bush Women, I realized that, the company is the actors are just fantastically, beautifully trained. They're really classical actors, although we're always accused of being experimental or avant-garde, but really they're classically trained actors. At a certain point, I said, what are we doing? We're creating work that shows a great ensemble working together seamlessly, but it became important that we actually meet other ensembles that work together seamlessly, so that when the two ensembles come together, or the three, it's not so seamless anymore, and that our boundaries are broken. And so over and over again, I think what we try to do as we approach any work is to break our own boundaries, our own restrictions, our own assumptions, our own understandings, and mess them up and come out with something that's different, that makes us shake in the doing of it, that makes us breathe differently. So this notion of SITI Company right now means a great deal to be together, but to be with other ensembles has become so important to us. And to be with, to bring people into the room, or to go into other people's rooms, or to create a new room together, that's what matters. And to do it in a collaborative spirit with hope and disagreement, and a kind of productive disagreement, that creates something worth watching and hearing and seeing and feeling. So I just want to say at the outset, I'm so thrilled to be here. We're all restricted in our little rooms, which feels horrible. And I kind of want to go just break these walls down. And I'm constantly moved by how everybody's trying to, they say social distancing. It's not social distancing. It's physical distancing. There is a lot of social networking happening. And I think, if anything, we're finding new partners and audiences through this restrictive environment. So I just want to say that I'm happy for anybody who's joining us this evening, and I hope we can break some walls down. But that's our intention. Yeah. Maybe not break them down, like let them dissolve in the chemistry or the, right.
It's interesting that you talk about being in a place together. As we're all thinking about what life looks like after our little Zoom boxes, there's a lot of conversation about deeper, longer term, more substantive time together, a slower way of working, and a way of working that has folks like me in a community like this welcoming our friends for longer periods of time, so that it's not a kind of, pay to play model like we've had all these years, and creates a more just and meaningful environment for artists and for our communities, and allow each other to transform each other as we're in ensemble and community together. I mean, one of the reasons why I loved festival life was because of the layers of humans who just came and were together either on stage or in the bar or whatever. But as we think about who's in the room, and we think about your legacy, you've all been talking about kind of holding place and thinking about the next generation. And Chanon, you said something the other day about really reflecting on, who's at the table with you now, and who might be at the table in the future, and who's missing. And I think, Ellen, you mentioned this about SITI as well. Would you like to tell us what you see now and in the future?
I actually would like to start by going a little bit into the past. And I want to say, before I do that, first of all, thank you for the invitation to be here. It really is a delight to be in this conversation. I am dreaming on, and you put out there what would happen if these players come together. At least that's what I saw when you said it. So I'm like, there's like a whole other thought bubble that's like, ooh, things could happen. In terms of who's in the room, I want to think about what's happened before the present moment, because it's so informed the role that I'm in right now in shared leadership with Samantha Spies. One of the things that's been really foundational for Urban Bushwomen is that in terms of who's in the room, a lot of the rooms, Urban Bushwomen wasn't in the room. So Urban Bushwomen's had to have a way-making modality of how we created our work. If we take these two things to rub them together and work with collaborators, then we can get to the fuller vision, because maybe the work is not getting the funding, the support, the eyes to fully bring it into fruition. The other thing that's been really important, and we talk about inside of our ensemble practice, is that turnover is a thing that the company had to learn to contend with. And the way that Jawole and makers solved that was to create practices, methodologies that would train the next crop of organizers, artists, administrators to come into the fold by learning the values and the practices that had been seeped prior to their coming into the room. So lots of folks know about our concert work. We have a whole other arm of our Summer Leadership Institute and our community engagement work, Builders, Organizers, and Leaders Through Dance, BOLD, which does some very literal and intentional teaching through of these are the values, these are some of the games and things that have put those values into practice. These are opportunities to be with other folks in collaboration and community to exercise those things. And so what happens is, in terms of who's in the room and who's at the table, the next generation of folks who will be then holding the baton and leading those rooms are at the table. The ensemble practice and the art making practice for Urban Bushwomen is very transparent. There's a storyboarding process that Jawole, in collaboration with another maker, Steve Kent, created, where the ways in which the maker at hand is thinking, the ways that they're bringing together themes and ideas, is made transparent to everyone in the room, so that we start to understand how they're seeing the larger picture while we're a player inside of it. So that as myself and Sam now come into leadership, these ways of not necessarily how to be Jawole, because that's not our charge, but how to understand the crafting of the density that is Urban Bushwomen, the bringing in of these multiple layers, the jazz aesthetic that is the way that we create. That kind of orchestration is something that we've been a part of, because we've been at those tables. So that's one thing that comes up. I think the other thing that maybe I talked about the other day that I'm excited to lean into is that Sam and I are really looking at some of the early ways in which Jawole and the early companies were building work, where there were the dramaturg and the set design and all the vocal production. All those folks were inside of the room from the start. When I joined the company in 2001, I came just at the shift when Urban Bushwomen started to go to. There's a model that folks call lights and tights, and it was like where things had to I'm going like this, like trying to get real skinny. Things had to narrow in a little bit. The belt had to tighten, and so it didn't shift the vision. It didn't shift the design of what of what the work is, but the how it came together had to get a little bit crafty and on how we could do those things. We're at a place now where it's like, okay, now we can draw from, we can loosen the belt a little and draw from those things that we know really enrich and fortify not just the work, but the practice. So I'm excited about the settling into those practices that were really grown from those early years.
Ellen, your training is very intense. We all know about your training in your summer institute and the physical rigor that goes into it. Are there things that you can relate to for SITI that Chanon just described, and vice versa? I mean,
Yeah.
What do you
Yeah,
think?
Chanon, you're a hard act to follow. and we've been in conversation, actually, Chanon and I, about bringing Chanon into our summer intensive. I kind of want to point at where we really began, which is this idea is a value system separate or different from the practice. And just as Jawole kicked us off tonight, for us as well, I would say they're born of the same rock deep in the earth. And it's a little bit a combination because everything, if there's something I think my colleagues in the SITI Company would want to relieve a younger artist about who's looking at creating an ensemble, is that it's always in disarray to a certain extent. It's always crisis management, and you're constantly in the present trying to innovate how to do it and how to do it better. But companies and ensembles, and this is where our summer institute, our summer training program, where we actually began, points at is that the plays we make they're just what we do. They don't make the company. And any young group starting out can't just assume that if you make plays together, you're going to be able to survive the slings and arrows of a world gone awry. What holds you together are these values that speak to the practice, and they have to have a direct line of connection, so that when you make your work and you're relying on particular analog practices that are pointing at the invisible, which are the values, you're teaching yourself how to do what it is that you're doing. This idea of heuristic, where you've been enabled by a generation before you. If you've been awake and you've paid attention and you've gathered from them, be they your elders or be they people you don't want to be like, but you gathered from them a sense of values, and then you're looking for a practice that will speak to that. And it's that thing that clears the playing field when you walk into a studio. And so for SITI Company, independent of one another, there were a group of artists practicing this thing called the Suzuki training that came out of a company in Japan, innovated and led by artistic director Suzuki Tadashi, called the Scott Company. And then we met Anne Bogart, who was coming with this practice that was born out of the research and innovation of Mary Overly, that Anne was also innovating. And I won't speak for you, Anne, about that. But what happened is a great deal by happenstance and good luck, which is also how things happen. We began to practice these two value systems together, which valued a horizontal world, which valued the idea of who's not at the table. As an artist, the forgotten and the unknown. And I think the literal translation of that, as well as the poetical translation, you're constantly, and I think SITI is now really looking at bringing to the table the forgotten and the unknown. And it's only through that can you have a transcendent artistic growth and experience. This is in our summer program, what we try to provide through the sharing of these languages. And honestly, it's just been a 30-year process of us going into a studio and absorbing and learning and surviving through the bodies, the heat, the spirits, the hearts of those artists that walk into those studios to learn from us. And it's quite the opposite. So it's a giant circle I'm talking about, but I think everybody engaged in looking at the forgotten, what is forgotten and what is unknown, and going towards that with a practice, with the solidity of a practice, intellectually, philosophically, physically, and spiritually, you will survive. And then you hand it on and have that knocked over by the next group. But you've got to help that group by handing on what you believe is a value and a tangible way of practicing that. And that's what our summer program and all our programs point at.
So you both are talking about doing artistic work that advances the depth and strength of your companies as much as anything else. But I'm going to ask a presenter kind of question. You know, we have been locked in a system that's really about producing and touring and performing. And that may be changing, and you know, with the grace of God, maybe we'll be able to be a little bit better at sharing and doing it in a more just way. But for now, selecting the stories that are to be told, how much of that is about advancing company and strength, and how much of that is actually creating a particular work that we know we're going to put on stage and we're going to be able to tour and meet our audiences with.
Hey, you know, I would love to address the issue you're thinking about, and you've brought it up. And every time I see you, ever since this crisis that we're in, about changes in the system, and in a conversation with a wonderful director named Sima Sueko, she's in DC, she said it the most clear, in an incredibly clear way, and I want to share it with you, and I think it affects all of us. She said, you know, we're in a crisis, but in fact, artists are still and are full of the intention to share what it is they're discovering in rehearsal, which is to answer the second part of your question. Audiences are just as, if not more, hungry to receive them. So you have these two entities. Then there's this thing which she calls the delivery system. And the delivery system is essentially the theater or the performing arts center. And she said, that's where things have to change. And I know you've been saying that. In other words, there's these two entities that really want to come together, but the delivery system has gotten screwed up somehow over time with certain assumptions about who's buying tickets, how much they cost. And so there's a paucity in terms of that connection, which has to be reinvigorated and rediscovered. And we all are responsible for that delivery system. It's not just to say, you know, oh, the theaters and the performing arts centers. It's to say, how can we bring audiences and artists together in a more dynamic, in a more affordable, in a more inclusive way? And I think one of the ways on the part of artists is to cross disciplines. Because when you get too siloed, which is what's caused a lot of the problems we're in this country right now. I'm in Britain. I don't know why I just said this country, but you know what I mean. I'm American. It has to do with overabundance of siloing. And so Urban Bushwomen SITI Company, whatever would happen is part of the solution. What the questions you're asking, Mary Lou, I think are really vital. And how do you unclog the delivery system and help these two entities come together?
I mean, I would just say that part of the unclogging is giving artists voice first. And I hope that that's what we're doing tonight and will continue to do together for a long period of time. We have
I wanted to say something about the delivery system, because I think in dance, the delivery system has had a particular set of challenges in that the expectation of concert modern dance is a fairly new form, 20s, 30s. And so there's an expectation that you do the dress rehearsal and the tech and the performance all in the same day. That's the way dance has traditionally operated. And that delivery system for work, I don't think it works for anybody, but particularly work that deals with multiple levels of complexity and story and cross-disciplinary, just simply does not work. So the first time you see the work in the costumes and the lighting and everything is maybe a few hours before the opening. So that delivery system in dance, we know that we want to talk about break down walls. That's when we really want to break down, because it doesn't serve the work, it doesn't serve the audience.
No, thank you for that, Jawole. We really, I think the more that we can say it, the more likely we'll be able to create it. So thank you, truly.
But I just have to say, I have heard many of your colleagues, Mary Lou, who are running these institutions / delivery systems, who are saying the same thing as you are. The smart ones are saying, let the artists step out front. And you've been saying it, and I won't name all the people who I admire who are running these institutions who have come to say that very strongly. So how do we not forget that once we're vaccinated and we're moving back into rooms together?
It's very important. We had someone at Arts Presenters talking about the common, right? And we have HowlRounds coming out of Arts Emerson, and we have some of these spaces now that are really about let's adopt a set of values and let's invite people to be part of the commons. So the question is, how far can we push that, and how much can we allow for us together as part of a common to know that this is a safe place to come and deposit ideas and art and take what we need from it at the same time. Now that's very metaphoric and not structured and not very logistical, and probably there's somebody rolling their eyes out there, but it's at least the dream we can try to work toward, or at least structure toward. And we're getting some comments from the chat. I think we've got about 70 or 80 people with us. And Katie Bradley says, love this philosophy of horizontal, not hierarchical. Fernando Montaneres says the values that make visible the invisible, something very city. So you're right, Anne, there are people out there talking about this, and they are really interested. Something else that I've been talking a lot about is the collective and the ensemble and the value of that. And I just have to ask the question. I mean, most of us have worked for most of our careers in, or at least I have worked in most of my careers in hierarchical, male dominant, white male dominant structures. And how much of the ensemble approach do you think is powered by a feminist approach, and how can that be translated to other institutions that are not structured that way, do you think?
Well, the gift that I appreciate in what you just named is that's been the opposite of my experience. I started with Urban Bush Women in 2001. And so my ensemble experience has been with a Black women-led company with a particular lens towards, in partnership with People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, a lens towards understanding and undoing racism. So the charge that's embedded in terms of how you hold and how you operate inside of ensemble practice is very different and very specific. It's an intentional countering of white dominant forms. It's an intentional countering of patriarchy. One of the things that I really lift up out of that practice is that ensemble is not equal to collective, where everything happens all together. You know, I think that there's a nicety to that, right? That is not productive. And so for us, ensemble, there's an oscillation between leadership and fellowship. There is a time when there is a definitive voice, and there is a place of being the witness. There's a time when that person who's a witness is then in a space of testimony. And there's an ask that people are mobile inside of those spaces and respectful of when you are in the space of being on that receiving end, when you are in the witnessing end. And it's very much the feminine design that says that there's cycles, that there are seasons, and that change isn't not only is it inevitable, but it's part of the operating system. So the leadership is not fixed. There are times where, as the artistic director, that we're definitely in the deep listening for what says the collaborative, and then when it's time to make the definitive voice, there's someone who's appointed there, and there's a trust in the room that this is how we move forward for clarity and efficiency. Which is very different from that kind of top down. If this is my position, I'm always here, and if that's your position, you're always there. I feel quite out of water when I'm in spaces that don't operate like that, because that's been the thing that has really built my chops and really solidified the thing that I'm like, oh, that makes the most sense.
That's
I think you just defined the feminist approach.
Yeah,
I think that's it.
I do too. That idea of the seasons that you pass through, that represents one rehearsal. That within a 3-hour, 4-hour period, you're going through such a complicated system of horizontality at one moment, and then it's stacked up in a completely hierarchical way, but it's a different stacking, and then it gets knocked over again, and you go through these waves and seasons, and that idea. I feel like the SITI Company, the way you've just described it, I think when we're really our most fecund, when we're really creative together, it probably is following a very feminine model in terms of not being stacked in a hard, white, Eurocentric male assumption.
And I want to bring a little humor to that.
Yeah.
When I was,
you're going to do an impression.
Early on when I was doing my work, I literally kept getting the comment that there's too many climaxes. I couldn't make it up, and people like, well, it goes, and then it kind of, and then it goes back, and I was like, we're not in the one climax male model. Now you want to go to sleep because you've been satisfied. We are in a whole different way that we are accessing our power.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think we're all going to hang on to that advice. In fact, we have Miriam in the chat who just mentioned that she loves give artists voice first. How can we as artists take steps and responsibility? Well, I think you got that answered, Miriam, by what Jawole just said. But seriously, in the context of all of this change, all of this uncertainty, there's opportunity. And actually, we do have another question about, so in the context of the pandemic, what would each of you leave behind? And what would you like to cultivate to bring forward?
Something that I think will help the delivery system and the artists is to perhaps use the hybridity that is coming out of how we've had to communicate with one another, and bringing audiences from around the world into the rehearsal room for parts of the rehearsals, and to develop new relationships using what we've learned through technology in this last year, and to take that forward. And I think we have to be more innovative than ever to bring the sort of flesh meeting together with this digital world that we are negotiating now, and not drop it entirely, but use the tools that we've been forced to deliver, to learn, mainly because we believe in social interaction. And so much of what we do is about ensemble, is about, in the best sense of the word, is of reaching out to one another, having exchange, being changed by one another. How can we use these tools to build stronger links between audiences and artists. And I think that's something that is happening. And I've heard it from a number of people, and you're probably one of them, Mary Lou, that the art centers are actually on hold with local audiences, but they're actually gaining international audiences and national audiences. And so I think that's true with our company too. SITI Company has been doing so many sessions that are not only classes, but social sessions and reaching out. And there's a community that's developing that's never been able to be together. And if we can somehow cultivate that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is true. And we're hearing that from others as well. And what about, I mean, we talked a little bit about the delivery system and the aspects of it that hinder art. But what else can we cultivate, and what are we leaving behind? What are we never going to go back to?
I don't know yet, in part, and that's an honest answer. We're in the middle of this. We are creating the history of this moment. It's never happened before in our lives, and will never happen this way again. What I'm interested in, I love this idea of what is it that you'll leave behind. There's something to do with burning off the fat, burning off what is if you take, it's the science experiment of how much can you take away and still have the essence of the thing, called the SITI Company or called urban bushwomen. What is it locating the thing you don't exist any longer without it or without these things, and locating that and coming to identify all of that other that perhaps makes it easier or is a cushion or you've assumed, and making the decision and finding out the discovery of what those things are, and maybe jettisoning some of them. Some on a physical level, SITI Company is in the middle of doing. A group of our company members are up in Yonkers in our storage and just heroically going through our 30 years of props and costumes and these things, these sacred objects to our lives, and what's in here and here and here get sort of tied in, and then those things are floating into the river, into new hands and new places, or into the dumpster. So that's sort of a practical answer, but I am interested in what is the essence where you remain, who you are. You identify that value and that practice, and it can continue on and burn bright and handed one.
So it's so interesting because I think the first time I met you, Chanon, you were talking about this very idea, but in the context of spending time in a community, creating wellness, creating real meaningful and impactful relationships and practices. And SITI, you're actually jettisoning your organization, right? That you're not jettisoning your art, but you in effect are deconstructing to the point of what you just described, Ellen. So it's just a very interesting thing to see both of you side by side and know that you're both digging deeper.
Yeah, I think it has to do with this delivery, that the SITI Company is in transition, in transformation, so that our delivery as artists, our delivery system is going to be slightly different than the organization we have now. But I think what we're hoping is that we continue to be in rooms with artists and be influenced and knocked out by them, and make work with them and sit at new tables and make a piece with urban bushwomen and
yeah.
So it's the invisible that nobody can take is what we're identifying, and that's going to continue.
Chanon,
something that I want to name. Earlier on, when you mentioned the conversations that you're inside of, which I really champion, of having artists come for longer periods of time instead of this check off. That's a conversation that we've been in for years, of how can we encourage folks to allow us to be in relationship with communities where we're sewing the net deeper as opposed to casting it wider, where we can be inside of a space and maybe we don't connect with all of the stratosphere. Maybe we stay and we're in relationship with this small sect of the community, but there, in terms of the delivery system, we're really looking at the audience as part of the ensemble of that we're really looking at building a relationship with folks in those community as integral to how are we building art, how are we building art community? So how are we building art in terms of like it really enriching our work in that circular way that we build, but also how are we building a community where folks have access and see value and are in relationship with artists. So I'm excited to know that more folks are having that conversation. And I gotta say that conversation is not a new conversation. I say we, and knowing that I'm standing on the shoulders of many folks who have long been rooted inside of that vision that it takes time, that it takes relationship, that it takes collaboration, and those are the metrics by which many folks build their work, measure the worth of their work, measure the success of their work. So. When we talk about that shift, that growing, we're talking about that same dominant male white paradigm that we were talking about a second ago in terms of how do we do, how do we do new things? Well, new things could be the old thing that some folks had been seeped in. So I just want to name that. I feel it's really important for me as new leadership to not feel like I'm doing a brand new thing. No, I'm furthering a thing that's already been seeded. And if I can recognize that other folks have already been charting the way, have been championing this, have created systems, then I don't have to recreate a wheel. I can learn that thing, and then I can see how is it in relationship with this time, this season. Mm-hmm. I feel very similar to what you said, Ellen, in terms of like, what do we leave behind? I don't know. I think in terms of thinking about the futuring, very similar. I'm thinking about what are the jewels and the gems that I'm learning right now that I'm like, oh, this thing feels precious to carry forward. And I think that inside of that process of seething through the things that we're learning or that we're rediscovering, that we carry those gems forward, and that helps to start to chart out the futuring process, and the things that don't serve, we allow those to fall to the wayside. We are, in fact, in the process of creating a new work where this process is actually like we're making ceremony of how we're futuring, how we're doing these very things through the new work that Sam and myself and a group of really amazing collaborators are working on alongside the company. This work is called Hank Blue, and it is this vision of how we're reckoning and restoring history and futuring through this lens of finding the jewels from behind, the things that we're holding in the moment, and carrying them forward for ourselves and also our environment.
Mm. We're actually getting close to the end of our time, and I would just want to know if any of you have questions for either of the others. Like, what do you want to know about each other? Because let me tell you something. If the chat has anything to do with it, you all are going to be somewhere in some place together making something happen, and I hope it's going to be the Hopkins Center.
Well, have you noticed how many times we've said between us?
Yes.
And, you say things to make them real. I mean, I'm more interested in discovering what I have no idea. Mm-hmm. I mean, every time we do, SITI Company has worked with a number of different companies, both dance companies and also musical ensembles and visual artists. And each time we try to learn to do what they do. So it's actually a physical kind of training. It's not like we do what we do, they do what they do, but we actually try to incorporate what they do. So I think it would be a living learning that would involve space and time. And something you said, Mary Lou, earlier, right at the top, you mentioned the word time, of taking more time. And if there's anything I want to leave behind is the rush, is that we are so damn busy. I want to actually take away the word busy, and nobody's allowed to ever say it again. And nobody's ever allowed to be busy again. And not even to say it, and because if you say it, you feel it, and to slow things down.
Yeah, we did a collaboration with a company from Senegal, Jean B, and it was 7 men from Senegal, and we, it was a big learning and a joyous, wondrous, and at times tense learning. And I think that excites me, the unknown, and finding out the assumptions I had going into the collaboration of what that might be like. We heard things like, oh, well, it's an Islamic culture, so the men are not going to be able to, touch the women. And then we got there and like, they're so steeped in forms of contact improv and because it's an African Senegalese approach to this religious form. So it blew open everything for both of us, and we learned. But it was because the director Germaine and we were in a room together, and we're like, "There's something here. There's something here. We don't know what it is." It happened over a 3-year period. We had a workshop together where we had 3 weeks, and we said, if it works, great. If we decide that we don't want to work together, we'll still love each other and we'll walk away. And then we took another year off to really figure out how to line this up. And then I would say another 1.5 years of workshops and time together. So I think that idea of time and allowing the time, in particular, this is really particularly in dance, because I think dance has been stuck in a model of 5, 6, 7, 8, go. Here's steps, go. And we've not been in that model. And so sometimes we felt like the kind of just odd, the oddball, where people would say, well, you're not quite theater, you're not quite dance. I don't know what you are. And what I'm comfortable is we are change. And if I think of anything, it's Octavia Butler and Parable of the Sower. Change is God, God is change. We are in a constant state of that finding God, finding change, finding new ways of being.
Touching the divine. I'm just so moved by that we and telling young artists that you do things to find out how to do them. You do things not knowing how to do them, and that it's through that. My one question to all of you would be, I don't know, it's coming to me louder and clearer. I feel like there's such a strong feeling between artists right now, because so to speak, the playing field is leveled with this global pandemic. And almost every single performing artist that I know is in the same situation. Now the joke is, what were you caught in the middle of doing in terms of on stage in March? And are you sensing that too? That there is perhaps a really a new dawn happening between artists, which is also something you referred to, Anne. I think we had become really siloed off from one another. That the feeling between us, to rest in that and to trust it and to keep that cultivated between us, keep that fire warm and glowing between us, rather than competing and going after the same grant money and all that whole structure of survival and busyness. But I'm feeling such a humane and compassion towards one another, intergenerationally, interdisciplinary. It's very moving to me. And these opportunities that you've given us here tonight, Mary Lou, to talk They're extraordinary. They really are.
We're really, I have to say, the Hopkins Center team and I are really humbled to be invited to host this conversation. And I look forward to the future conversations that SITI will ignite and the future collaborations that you'll find along the way, and the learning that you will help us all focus in on. I'm listening to all, the four of you, and I'm just thinking how grateful our students would be, and our young people, even those who aren't necessarily training or interested in a life as an artist, but recognizing, as you tend to in a liberal arts college, that arts and creativity is not about learning to be an artist. It's really about learning to be a human being. And that's our goal every day, is to help people be the best humans they can be. And I can't imagine a more fruitful time for all of us if we can actually find a time when we can assemble live together, your companies and our community. It would be just a special, special moment, and maybe a model for others. So with that, I have to say we're just past 9 o'clock, and we really have had a tremendous showing here tonight, and lots of good friends of us all in the chat, just kind of saying hi and sending love, and every other line saying, when is SITI and Urban Bush Women going to be together at the Hopkins Center? So, so we'll fix that too. I do want everybody to know Haint Blue is on the boards almost. It's metaphorically on the boards. It's actually on the boards, and we hope to have it on the boards at the Hop, maybe with a longer period of time getting to know our community. Jawole, we are so grateful. You are choreographing a work. We're experimenting. We're actually producing our first work at the Hopkins Center. It's a piece called Ritual of Breath is the Right to Resist. And it's a reflection on
great title.
Yeah, right. So the librettist is Viavi Francis, an award-winning poet. She's on our faculty, an amazing woman, and I'd be happy to send you the libretto because you would love reading it. The composer is Jonathan Berger, and the visualist, I would say, is Enrico Riley, an extraordinary painter. He and Jonathan met on a Prix de Rome and just fell in love with each other, and really wanted to make something that would make life different for people. And this has now become a piece that is a reflection. It's based on the Eric Garner story with a soprano modeled on the voice of Eric Garner. And it's essentially a passion and healing experience. And Jawole's choreographing. So that was all for that. That's great. Well, again, one day it'll be live, someday it'll be digital. We're still trying to figure all of that out. And SITI, another talk maybe in the spring, I hear, is in the works. We'd love to have you back on any topic that you're interested in, and certainly look forward to a last production of the medium back at the Hopkins Center, and hopefully something in between, because we can't plant a seed.
Can I say that we were about to tour a production called The War of the Worlds, is based on the radio play Orson Welles. Everybody was scared of the Martians when 9/11 happened. And our first place we were supposed to tour was the Hopkins Center. And the places we were touring to called us saying, wait, is this a good idea? Like, everybody in the world is freaked out, and should you come? And I was on the phone a lot saying, yeah, we should come. I was terrified. Our first performance of it on tour was at the Hopkins, and the audience came in, and everybody was freaked out. And I thought, are we making the biggest mistake in the world? Because we're doing a show about the Martians arriving, and and basically blowing up the world. And what happened, Ellen, you might remember this, nobody wanted to leave afterward. I realized how important it was after 9/11 for people to come together into that theater and stay, and to see something like that, and to stay and to be together. And the play was very powerful, but I think even more powerful was the act of gathering.
Yeah.
And that is a new art form which we need to rediscover and figure out how to do, is the art of gathering. What that looks like and how we can gather together. So I look forward to all of that.
Oh, thank you, Anne. Thank you so much. And thank you all. Thank you for being so open and so willing to share from the depths of your heart. It's a rare opportunity to see inside the soul of an artist, not just hear the voice. So thank you all. We look forward to when we're gathering again, and I think we've planted some seeds that will grow.
Yes.
Take care, all.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chanon and Jawole.